You are listening to Recovery Queen Melissa Presents Tales from the Trap. I am your host, Melissa McMillan. I am a recovering addict, a human trafficking survivor, and yes, a human trafficking convict. I spent 20 years in active addiction, experiencing things most couldn't imagine. This podcast is where we tell the truth about the streets, about the system, about survival, recovery, trauma, and the people who never made it out. These stories are raw, real, and sometimes they're hard to hear, but you know what? They matter. This is Tales from the Trap. Okay, so before I tell you everything, I need to tell you where I was when the ground finally gave way. It was May 2020, while the world was in the midst of a global pandemic. Everyone was just waiting for the government to tell us what to do next and bracing for COVID-19's next wrath. At this point, I'd been in active addiction for like 18 years. Tossed into the psych ward after a near fatal fentanyl overdose, one of many. I was preparing myself for what I had just agreed to, shock treatment. For 3 months, I let electricity touch my brain because nothing else could. A psychiatric ward in the middle of a life already collapsing. Paper gowns, locked doors, fluorescent lights, so bright that it made my pain look ordinary. I signed consent forms with hands that didn't feel like mine. I don't remember every word I signed. I just remember knowing this. If this doesn't work, I don't know what will. At this point, my parents were done taking care of me. I had lost custody of all of my kids, so they had become the priority, as it should be. But they were in their 50s, raising small children all over again to keep them out of the system, and they were absolutely exhausted and angry, especially my mom. We never had the best relationship, but by 18 years of her picking up the pieces of my addiction, she was done. I don't even think she saw me as alive anymore. She had mourned the loss of me before I was even dead. She absolutely hated who I was, probably even more than I hated myself. She was ashamed of me. She still is, if I'm being real. But that's what addiction does. It can make a parent hate their own child. Even today, she doesn't see my recovery as something to celebrate. Last year, when my friends and family came together to celebrate 4 years in recovery, she refused to attend. So because my parents were busy raising my kids, they completely refused to deal with my sickness anymore. That's when my dad's sister, my aunt, stepped in. She had been a social worker at Ontario Works for 20 years at that point. So she had experience working with addicts. And recently, when I asked her about this time in our lives and why she decided to take over for my parents, she said this: I wasn't about to let you be out there thinking that you had no one. So she carried me. She carried me when I was too heavy for anyone else. She fed me. She watched me. She made sure that I was still alive. She held the pieces of me that hadn't yet been stolen by addiction and trauma and consequence. By that point, like I said, I had lost everything. And what I mean when I say that is I lost all my children. They were gone. My youngest child, my son, didn't even know me. Not the way a child knows their mother without being told. My 3 daughters were living with family. They were safe and stable and loved, while I existed in the cracks between institutions and the life I swore that I would have one day. When I got out of the mental institution in 2020, I didn't come back to myself. I came back to the streets. And that's where I met her again, a girl I had just met in the psych ward, Samantha. We became best friends the way broken people do. Fast, intense, no small talk, just codependency and substance abuse. There were benders that blurred days into nights and nights into nothing. I was always the first one to fall asleep after a bender. And every time I did, she'd leave me a little note. Little scraps of paper or cardboard, whatever she could find, telling me that she was grateful for our friendship. That I mattered. That she loved me and the way people love each other when they're surviving the same storm. I kept those notes like proof that I still existed. until one day she didn't show up. No text, no knock at my door, no goodbye, just absence. And at first I was angry. I kept texting her, "You don't have to ignore me if you don't want to come over and share dope with me. I thought we were friends." For days, the text went unanswered until I did get a response, but it wasn't a response from Samantha. It was her dad. And he simply said, "I found her dead with a needle in her arm." After that, I totally spiraled. I started going on even longer benders, 2 weeks at a time before I'd even sleep. No sleep and no fear is a bad combination. My friends and I were terrorizing the city, driving around looking for something, anything, to rob for drug money. But at the time, we barely had any gas left and no money and no way to get money. So we went back to my apartment, a little 1 bedroom subsidized unit I had got by staying in a domestic violence shelter for a year. So I walk into my building first with my friend behind me, and I hear it. I hear someone say my name. I turned around and my whole body knew before my mind even did. I thought they were there for the charges that I already had: transportation fraud, assault, theft, bail conditions stacked so thin they felt like glass. And I started screaming, "No, no, 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 no. I'm out on a PTA. I'm out on a PTA." And for those of you who haven't been dragged through the legal system, a PTA is a promise to appear. I kept repeating it like repeating it could undo reality. And then the officer looked at me and said something that froze my blood colder than handcuffs could. "Sorry, Mel. This is about a different matter." They said they were waiting for the arresting officer to come talk to me. I stood there shaking, yelling, bargaining with the universe, because all I could think about was Thursday. Every Thursday, my dad would bring my kids to my apartment to see me. And I'm not proud of this, but I'm going to tell you the truth, because this is what happens when you've been battling addiction for as long as I had at the time. Addiction never sleeps. So I would literally smoke crack, my drugs of choice, up until they arrived. Then I'd hide everything like a magician: pipes, bags, lighters. Like I could make the truth disappear long enough to pretend that I was human. When they'd come over for that 1 hour, I almost felt like a mom again, even though I knew I wasn't. Even though my dad watched me the whole time like a guard dog, even though motherhood was something I was only allowed to borrow. But for that hour, my kids would sit with me and they would laugh with me and they would love on me. And it helped me remember who I was supposed to be and who I was surviving for. So standing in that lobby, I wasn't thinking about drugs or crime or consequence. I was thinking about Thursday. Then the arresting officer arrived, and I screamed at her too. I told her I needed bail. I told her that I had kids, and she didn't even flinch. But she read the charges. 9 counts under the Human Trafficking Act: trafficking of crack and trafficking of fentanyl. I didn't hear anything after the words human trafficking, because all I could think of was how. How can a woman be a survivor of exploitation and be charged with exploitation? How can a woman who has lived through human trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault, be told that she's the trafficker? I felt disgusted, and not just at the charge, but at myself, at the fucking world, and at the mirror. That was the night my story stopped being something I was running from and became something I could no longer outrun. And that is where my story begins. Hi, my name is Melissa McMillan. I'm here to tell my story. What I'm not here to do is sugarcoat it. My story is raw and unfiltered, and unfortunately, it's extremely common. Today, I'm sharing my perspective on an industry, the industry of exploitation, an industry that I was in and out of for like 15 years. But today I'm going to call it sex work, because that's the language society uses now. That's the politically correct term, not prostitution, sex work. Now, my perspective may not be your perspective, and that's totally okay. All I ask is that you take in what I'm sharing with an open mind and an open heart. At the end, if you have any questions or want clarifications, you can ask, but right now, I'm just asking for you to listen. There are two things I need people to understand before I go any further. First, Canada's human trafficking laws include offenses that people in active addiction can commit, sometimes without even understanding the full legal definition of what they're doing. Second, people who've been exploited can sometimes become involved in exploitation themselves. That's what happened in my life. And that's what I've heard in the stories of hundreds of women who've messaged me since I started sharing my story publicly. My story is raw, but it is full of accountability. I don't tell it to glorify anything, and I don't tell it to vilify anyone. I also don't tell it to trigger anyone either. So if something I say today brings something up for you, please reach out to Angels of Hope Against Human Trafficking for resources and support. So before I begin, I want to read you a message I received from another survivor, but also a woman who was charged under the Human Trafficking Act of Canada. She says, I have a similar story. Same drugs of choice, similar charges, same sentencing. And I've been in recovery for just over 2 years. Hearing you take accountability and being so raw and open has helped me cope with the choices that I made while in active addiction, now that I'm no longer there. Your platform does make a difference. Thank you. And that is just one of hundreds of messages that I've received from women over the years since I came out publicly with my own story. All of these messages matter, and I respond to every single one because guess what? Shame will kill you faster than drugs ever will. So, in 2011, I was introduced to sex work by a girl I actually went to elementary school with. Same person that introduced me to IV drugs, same person I contracted hepatitis C from. She showed me how to do sex work. Back then, it was like dating websites. That's what we were using. That's how we would find Johns. And for clarity, when I say Johns, I mean men who pay for sex. So this was 2011, like I said, and I was 26, and I had just given my 4-year-old daughter to my parents because things at home with her father and I had become far too violent and extremely unstable. Shortly after she went to live with them, her father put me in the hospital. He came home from work drunk, angry at what I don't even remember. He stood over me as I laid on a mattress on the floor reading a book, and he smashed me in the head with the dresser drawer. He knocked me out cold. When I came to, I remember crawling to the bathroom, screaming for someone to save me. If the upstairs tenants hadn't heard me screaming that night, screaming for someone to call 911 that I was dying, I may not have even made it. I left the hospital with 7 staples in my skull. Those are the kinds of men that I had in my life for 2 decades. So at the time in 2011, Sudbury was in the middle of an OxyContin epidemic. Methadone programs had months-long wait lists, and I couldn't get on a program no matter what I tried. So in order for me not to be dope sick all the time, my little brother used to buy methadone on the street and come and dose me every day. That's how I started doing sex work. It wasn't for purses or shoes or makeup or for extra income. It was to survive withdrawal. And that's how a lot of women get into it. People ask me why I started using drugs in the first place. And the truth is, it was just in my genes. I had a beautiful childhood. My dad worked in the smelter at Glencore, formerly Falconbridge Inc. My mom worked at CRA, both really good jobs. We didn't want for anything growing up. I had 2 loving parents in the home. I had loads of stability, a sibling that I was close to that was only 2 years younger. We had a pool in the backyard, and we went to Disneyland for vacation. I was popular at school, and I had a load of friends. Some people would say that I had a perfectly normal upbringing. But what I also had was a predisposition to addiction that nobody told me about. It was hereditary. Mental illness and addiction ran on both my mom and my dad's side of the family. My addiction started when I was a teenager. It was the late 90s, early 2000s. We were going to raves. That was the scene back then. Just harmless experimenting using drugs like ecstasy. Until one night, my friend, much older than me, gave me a pill. And he said, "Here, take this. It'll make you feel better. You won't feel as sketchy." And I took the pill not knowing that it was Oxycontin. And it had awakened something in my brain that I didn't even know it was there. That was there, sorry. And before I knew it, by 18, I was walking into my first methadone clinic. So by 2012, I'm still using heavily. I'm still doing sex work to keep the withdrawal at bay when I get pregnant again. By the time she was born in September 2013, I was doing much better. I had a nice apartment. I had managed to get clean. I had also accumulated everything you would need for a new baby, and I wasn't using as much, and I was not doing sex work anymore. I even finally, after 13 years, left the violent relationship I had with the father of my daughters. Children's Aid Society was involved, but they really didn't have any concerns. My parents and my oldest daughter were back in my life and were supporting me. Life finally felt normal again. By May 2013, I had met someone. He seemed great, and he was madly in love with my new daughter, Aria, who was only a few months old at the time. He treated her like she was his own. Since her biological father wasn't involved at all, and he had such a violent nature, I did what I thought was best, and I allowed my new partner to act as her dad. He signed her birth certificate when she was 6 months old, and we gave her his last name. By December 2014, we had our own daughter together. So now my two youngest girls are only 14 months apart, and I have an 18-year-old daughter as well. Life was pretty great. And even though I was still using, we looked stable. We had a home and a car and food in the fridge, and I wasn't selling my body anymore. From the outside, it looked like a normal family. And for a while, raising my girls with their dad was some of the best times of my life. I always say if you would have pulled up my Facebook back in 2015, you would have seen a beautiful family photo, 3 little girls and a couple that loved each other. It was absolute bliss until it wasn't. The thing is, of course, the man that I was now raising my family with was also an addict. One who had bouts of sobriety but had relapsed shortly before meeting me. So, of course, it wasn't long before we were both using opiates together. So by 2016, our addiction had spiraled again when my partner introduced me to IV cocaine. Within about 90 days, my family had to take my kids because they were apprehended by Children's Aid. And I was back on the streets doing sex work to support our habit. That's how fast it can happen. Within 90 days, I lost everything. And that's why I hate the term functioning addict, because in my experience, you're only functioning until you're not. This is where human trafficking enters my story in a way I didn't understand at the time. My partner was deep into his addiction and experiencing horrific cocaine psychosis. At first, sex work was something I was doing willingly to make money so the both of us could get high. But then he got involved. And then more involved. Too involved. He started setting up dates, making me sleep with people, sitting in the driveway while I would sleep with his friends for money. And then he started threatening me, forcing me to trade sex for drugs to dealers, taking my money and my drugs. Sometimes there was even violence, a punch in the face, or he'd wrestle me to the ground and rip my clothes from my body, searching me for drugs or money that he was convinced I had hidden. There was always violence. There wasn't always violence, but often threats and always control. And the crazy part is people in the community actually noticed. At this point, I was working outside on a corner on Kathleen in Sudbury. Businesses and their customers on the strip, as we used to call it, started calling the police. People would call and say, "Hey, I think this girl is being pimped out by her boyfriend." They saw what was going on. They saw how he'd attack me right out in the open. And the police would show up and I would lie to their faces and say that he was protecting me and that I was out there by choice. And this happened over and over. But in that world, you don't tell the truth. You don't tell the truth mostly because I didn't even know if what he was doing was wrong, like legally. I didn't have language for it back then. At the time, nobody even understood what human trafficking looked like. And when you're being trafficked by someone you love, your brain rewrites reality to survive. So, before I proceed, I want to share something that I wrote about what happened next. So one day my partner is in the midst of a really bad cocaine psychosis episode and he's being violent and he's not making any sense and I was done. So I take off with a friend for a couple days, another working girl. The only reason I was even on Kathleen on the stroll that night was so I can make enough money to get another hotel room for the night. That's when they pulled up. They pulled up beside me like it was nothing, like I was nothing, like the sidewalk was a menu and I was already priced. Two men, a car, a smile that looked like safety. They said they had a deal for me, like it was a joke, like it was a favor. $250, just dance. Just do your thing, no touching, just a sexy performance. And I remember thinking I'm fucking disgusting. Not because I was out there, not because I was just out there trying to survive, but because part of me had actually started to confuse soft voices with safe men. They were sweet, or so I thought. That's the part people don't understand. Predators don't always show their teeth first. Sometimes they show you kindness, like a weapon wrapped in velvet. They drove to the store to pull out the money at the ATM and everything was normal. The world was still turning, like nothing evil was sitting in the front seat. They pulled the money out like it was proof of their harmless intentions, like it was trust, like a promise, and I took it. I tucked it into my bra because even my body had compartments back then. Places to hide cash, places to hide shame, places to hide the fact that I was still a human being even when I was being treated like a thing. So we drove around a bit and then we found a secluded spot. I hate that word, secluded, because it sounds like peace. It sounds like privacy. It sounds like choice, but secluded is where screams go to die. Secluded is where the truth doesn't have witnesses. Secluded is where people learn how quickly sweet can flip. So I started doing what I was asked because survival teaches you to obey even before you know you're obeying. Because addiction teaches you that dignity is negotiable. Because the streets teach you that you don't get to be picky about danger. You just pick which danger is paying tonight. And then the air changed. That's the only way I can describe it. Like the oxygen got thick, like my instincts stood up and I didn't have time to speak. And their voices changed, then their hands changed, and the car got smaller and the world got farther away. And I remember my brain doing that thing, that survival trick where it tries to leave your body so your body can take the hit without your soul watching. I remember realizing that I'd gotten the wrong car. I got in the wrong car with the wrong men, and there was no door handle on the inside of that moment. So I was attacked and violated, and an entire piece of my soul was taken. And if you've ever had that happen, please listen when I say this. That was not sex. That was not a bad date, and it was not a consequence. It was not a lesson. It was violence, and it was theft, and it was someone grabbing your humanity and trying to snap it in half. After they drove back towards the stroll like they were returning a rental, like they were dropping off trash, and they just threw me out naked without clothes, without protection, without safety, without control, without the illusion that the world had rules. And when I hit the pavement, it felt like the city didn't even flinch. And here's the part nobody talks about. I didn't call the police. I didn't go straight to the hospital. I didn't scream until someone came running. I just got up and started running myself. I honestly didn't even think I deserved rescue. Because when you live that life, you learn to file your trauma away like it's just another cost of doing business. Because I thought this is just what happens to girls like me. And that belief was its own kind of assault. That belief is what keeps women trapped. That belief is what traffickers prey on. That belief is what pimps feed off of. That belief is what systems ignore. I could see another working girl down the street by the bus shelter, so I ran to her with everything I had. Just another woman who knew the code, a woman who didn't ask what I did to deserve it. She just gave me some clothes. That moment was the only moment of softness that I got that night. Not from the men who smiled, not from the car that promised money, but from a woman on the same street who understood survival sometimes looks like handing your sweater to a naked stranger and saying, I see you. I've got you. Keep moving. But the thing was, she wasn't a stranger. Her name was Ashley. We went to high school together. But I did keep moving, not because I was okay and not because I was strong, but because my body knew one thing: stay alive, stay alive, stay alive. But I need you to understand this before I tell you the rest of the story. That night didn't make me worthless, didn't make me disposable, didn't turn me into an object. But that night is proof what men will do when they believe no one will care. And I'm telling you now because I care, because I survived it, and because I'm done living in a world where a woman almost has to be murdered for someone to call it fucking violence. So if you're listening to me and you've ever had that wrong car moment, if you've ever learned too late that sweetness can be a trap, I want you to hear me. What happened to you is not your fault. Not because you were using, not because you were working out there, not because you were broke, and not because you were desperate, and not because you trusted the wrong smile. It was their choice. And I'm here standing in front of you telling you this. Sometimes evil is just two men in a car with voices and cash in their hands and the confidence that no one will come for them after they murder a hooker's soul. So when I got pushed out of the car, I ran to that working girl that was standing on Kathleen. And like I said, her name was Ashley. We knew each other from childhood. She gave me some clothes and she begged me to call the police, but I didn't. Because all that assault did in that moment was this: it solidified the idea that I needed my partner to survive. It just reinstilled the idea that I could actually die if I'm not out there with him. I would much rather be hurt by someone who loves me than men I didn't even know. That's what exploitation does. It traps you in logic that looks insane to outsiders but feels like oxygen when you're drowning in it. Okay, and I want to say something that may be hard for some to understand. I don't tell this story to make anyone a villain or to destroy the hard work anyone has done to recover since this happened over a decade ago. Addiction is a disease and it can turn people you love into monsters. That's not me excusing it. That's me explaining the depth of illness in that world. But here's what I didn't know then that I know now. Nobody can control your sex work. Not your boyfriend, not your husband, nobody. Nobody can intimidate you into handing over money you made. No one can arrange dates, drive you, sit and watch, threaten you for the money, or take the drugs you bought with the money you made. That's trafficking, human trafficking. And I didn't even fully understand that until years later when the courts forced me to take human trafficking survivors counseling after I got charged. When I started sharing my story publicly, women flooded my inbox saying, I didn't even know I was trafficked. My boyfriend did that to me. My dealer did that to me. My partner made me work off drug debts that way. So none of my story is rare, especially the exploitation parts. They're common. Like 33% of women say they were trafficked by someone that they loved, an intimate partner. That's not a movie plot either. That's actual statistics. This is everyday life for women in active addiction. That's a really good segue into my next experience with human trafficking. So, next, I'm going to talk about how men who sell drugs often are intertwined with trafficking and exploitation. I didn't have the typical like pimp relationship with my trafficker. He was actually my drug dealer, someone I'd known for years. He reached out after years of like no contact, not talking. He reached out posing as a John. So he pulls up for a date, posing as someone who wanted to pay for sex. And I get in the car and I realize that it's him. My friend, someone that was always good to me. He insisted I shouldn't be doing calls over like Plenty of Fish and dating apps, that he could help me. And I believed him. That night, I traded sex for drugs. And then he gave me a phone. Not flowers, not a way out, a phone. And it had a new number connected to an escort ad. And that phone was always ringing. 13 years I'd known him. 13 years of shared nights where survival pretends to be friendship. He said, I got you, girl. I'll help you. You don't have to be sick anymore. And I believed him. Because when you're drowning, you don't question the hand that pulls you up, even if it's attached to the anchor. So he put up ads. He typed my body into sentences and pressed post like it was just paperwork, like it was normal, like it was nothing, but it was Backpage. My face reduced to pixels, my trauma edited for demand. And he even gave me a room in some lady's apartment so I could do calls out of. 4 walls that looked like safety if you didn't stare too hard at the door. Men came in, money went out, straight back into his pocket. And I told myself that it was a choice, that he never took anything from me because no one's hitting me, no one's punching me, no one's got their hands around my throat, nobody's breaking my bones. But he broke something a lot quieter. He knew every single dollar I made would circle back to him, right? Knew every man that I survived was another handful of money coming his way. He knew my sickness, he knew my fear, and he knew the math. I wasn't being rescued, I was being managed. I thought he was helping me leave the man who would make me sleep with his friends for dope. I thought it was like the lesser of all evils, the cleaner hell. I didn't know yet that exploitation doesn't always come with screams. Sometimes it whispers, I'm doing this for you. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who's never laid a hand on you. Just their claim. I wasn't trafficked by a stranger. I wasn't kidnapped. I wasn't chained. I was handed a phone and told that it was freedom. And I answered it because I didn't know what real help looked like when it wasn't conditional. Now I know. If your survival pays someone else, it isn't survival, it's a system. I was never the one making the money. I was just the product. And at the time, I convinced myself he was helping me because he wasn't taking any cash out of my hand. He didn't need to. He was my drug dealer. He knew every dollar I made was going right back to him anyways. And then in October of 2016, I find out I'm pregnant with his baby. And I remember him and my partner one night before I found out I was pregnant. They're texting back and forth, making arrangements for me to go trade my body for drugs. And I told him I didn't want to. I didn't want to that night, and I was tired. When I said no, he got mad. He got angry. And he literally physically picked me up and put me in the car. completely disregarding my pleas. I remember when we pulled up to the hotel that this drug dealer was living out of. My partner looked at me and he said, "If you don't come out of that fucking hotel with 2 bags of dope, I'm going to smash your head into this dashboard." That was the night that I conceived my son. In June of 2017, I have his baby. I went from labor and delivery to the mental institution. The baby was adopted by a family, someone who gave him a life I couldn't give him. A child who today calls someone else mom. Even though I'm 5 years in recovery and have his siblings back in my care, he doesn't even know me. Those are the consequences of the life that I once had because of my disease. So later, that dealer, he was actually arrested. He was sentenced to 7 years in the pen for a slew of human trafficking charges and sexual assault charges, completely unrelated to me, of course. And I remember thinking, this is literally what this guy does. The most terrifying part, though, men like that, they often come back to our communities after they get released to continue these acts of exploitation. And he did. Today, he's out living amongst us. So from 2018 to 2020, I'm in and out of jails and institutions and rehab, deep in addiction, deep in sex work. And the partner that I had, the father of my youngest daughter, I was with him from 2013 to 2018. He actually went off to treatment and got better. In May of 2018, I'm living in a domestic violence shelter because I'm trying to get us an apartment so we can get our kids back. And I go to message him one day and he blocked me off everything. Those are the sacrifices you have to make to save your own life. And he did. He got better. He went home to our daughter. And to this day, he's years and years into recovery. So after staying in the domestic violence shelter for a full year, I'm finally able to get my own place. I had signed custody away of all my kids, though, so I literally felt like I had nothing to live for. So before fentanyl had its grip around our community's throats, we had already survived decades of OxyContin. OxyContin was introduced in the mid-90s, okay, by a pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma. It was an extended release form of the opiate oxycodone meant for pain relief. But here's the part that matters most, okay? Purdue Pharma didn't just sell a pain pill, they sold a story about the pill. They told doctors and patients that it was safe, that it had little risk of addiction, even less than other opiates. They pushed it hard for all kinds of pain, not just serious and terminal conditions. And many doctors listened because they thought they were doing good. That claim about addiction risk, it wasn't even based in science. It came from small, limited evidence that the company itself promoted, then highlighted. Because of that aggressive marketing, OxyContin prescriptions skyrocketed, completely exploded across North America. Because people who were supposed to be helped ended up being dependent. Communities like Sudbury that trusted medicine were blindsided. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pled guilty to criminal charges, actually, for misbranding OxyContin, basically admitting that they misled doctors and patients about how addictive it really was. And once that wave of opiate dependence spread, once people were already hooked, that's when the rest of the horror came in. Fentanyl started flooding the black market, driving overdoses and deaths far beyond what OxyContin alone did. In other words, the opiate pain pill wasn't just medicine in a bottle. It was the opening chapter in a story of addiction that mainstreamed opiates long before the illegal stuff showed up. Our city didn't get hit by fentanyl out of nowhere. It was already wounded by what came before it. So by 2020, white crosses start appearing in downtown Sudbury, one by one, then clusters, then rows. They called it Crosses for Change. It was a campaign started by a bereaved mother whose son died of a drug overdose, and it was meant to put a face to the skyrocketed overdose rates. In Sudbury, our overdose rates are over 200%, up 200%. Timmins is even worse. So these white crosses, they were people I knew, people I loved, people I laughed with, people who I slept beside, people who promised they'd text tomorrow, but tomorrow never came. And somehow, in the middle of all that, I make the decision. I make a decision that made perfect sense at the time. Because I didn't want to be here anymore. Guess what? I chose to start using fentanyl. Because if I was going to disappear, I wanted it to be fast. Because living had become a long, slow, painful punishment, and hope felt completely irresponsible. Because waking up felt cruel. I told myself it would kill me quicker. Like I said, I felt like I had nothing to live for. Nothing that outweighed the exhaustion of surviving another day in a city, burying an entire generation. This wasn't reckless. This was a resignation. So by October 2020, after the overdose that put me in the mental hospital, after losing Samantha, after coming to terms with the fact that I was just going to use until I died, that's when I met her. It was a woman much older than me, and she lived in my apartment building. I could tell right away she had some like mental health issues. She may have been a little developmentally delayed, but honestly, who isn't on day 5 of smoking crack? So she asked me if I could find her drugs. And of course I did. She ends up back at my apartment for days. And I remember my friend looking at me and saying, "You need to get that girl out of your house because she's been sitting here for 2 days begging for dope." So I see her. She's sitting on my floor. She's all sketchy, shaking. Her eyes are darting. Her voice is thin with need. She's begging for dope like it's been her job that she's not getting paid to do. So I snap. And I wasn't cruel, just exhausted. Well, maybe I was cruel. I was probably very cruel because the woman that had inhabited my body back then, I call her Trap House Mel. She was always cruel, to be honest. So I yelled at her, "You cannot just sit here begging for dope. You need to go, leave, come back with money. I don't care. Figure it out." That's how the trap teaches you to speak to each other. Efficient, completely detached. It was like being polite was like a character flaw. And she looked at me. And that's when she said it. "I want to do what you girls are doing." And the room went quiet in a way that still kind of echoes till this day. Because for the last few months, me and a handful of women had been surviving together doing sex work out of my apartment. There was always money, there was always dope, there was always a way through the night. And suddenly, I could see myself from the outside. I knew right then what that sentence meant. I knew the law. I knew the words human trafficking. I knew that bringing women into sex work wasn't a gray area on paper. But the streets don't speak legal language, they speak withdrawal, and I was tired. The thing is, women have brought me into sex work before I ever brought anyone else. They showed me how to survive addiction by using my body as currency. Nobody went to jail for that. Nobody called it trafficking then. They called it showing her the ropes. So I did the math with a sick mind in a desperate room. I thought, isn't it safer? Like doing it all together? Isn't it better than a fucking pimp? I told myself I was helping her. I told myself I was just passing down knowledge, not harm. So I was the one with the working phone, right? I'm the one that knew how to make ads. I'm the one that's good with words. So sitting there in this little one bedroom apartment that I had turned into a makeshift brothel, watching me, waiting for my answer, and I felt it. That sharp knowing that splits your life in two. This is either going to be the worst mistake I've ever made or the beginning of my salvation. Because sometimes the moment that ruins you is the same moment that saves you. And I didn't know which one it would be yet. I just knew something irreversible had entered the room the second she asked to be like us. I remember my friend looking at me going, Mel, don't you fucking dare. But I had helped other women before. That this was not, it was, we never called it human trafficking. So I agreed. Of course I agreed. I took her pictures. I made the ad. I used my phone because my phone was the only working phone. So I used the number. Was anyone chained? No. Anyone beaten? Nope. Anyone physically forced? Nope. But was it exploitation? Yes. Because today my trauma-informed brain understands that consent and survival is not the same as consent and safety. And I 100% took advantage of her addiction. Just like my traffickers took advantage of mine. Because here's the part that most people don't get. Sex work itself is one thing, and it's completely legal in our country. But helping someone enter it, arranging it, advertising it, facilitating it, those are all offenses. That's why I tell people, please learn what the Human Trafficking Act of Canada actually is, because it's a list of offenses that women in active addiction end up committing parts of without even realizing it. So after she does her first call, things start getting weird. Okay? She starts selling all her shit for dope. I remember taking a 50-inch, 60-inch TV on the bus with her to sell to my drug dealer. And that's when the accusation started, actually, after she sold all of her things. That's when this worker of hers gets involved. She shows up to her house one day looking for her, wondering what's going on, thinking she's 100% using again. That's when the worker goes into her house and realizes all her stuff is gone. And instead of taking responsibility for the choices she made, she said something that sealed my fate. She said, I not only made her sell all her things for drugs, but I was forcing her to do sex work. Then she shows up at my apartment one last time to tell me what she had done and how sorry she felt for saying it. When I heard that she was talking to the police and that she accused me of all of that, I lost my shit. But what made me really flip out was when she told me she talked to the police about my drug dealer. I had brought her to his house so many times, and she told the cops everything. I stood there looking at her, absolutely stunned. I started screaming, they're going to find us in Lake Ontario, you fucking idiot. Why would you do that? She starts walking towards the elevator, and I'm yelling obscenities at her. I wasn't only angry, though. I was actually terrified because that exact drug dealer had just held a woman hostage for a week before she escaped. And I didn't exactly want that to be me or any of us. After that, I didn't hear from her again. And months went by, but I felt it in my gut. I knew I was being watched. I kept replaying in my head what had happened. Is what I did actually human trafficking? I remember actually calling up a convicted human trafficker in the city, like an old drug dealer of mine, and saying, "Hey, is what I did human trafficking?" And when he said yes, that was the moment I knew it was all coming. So it's December 18th, 2020. After a multi-day bender, I'm walking into my apartment building after spending hours driving around looking for money for dope. And I walk into the lobby and I hear my name, Melissa McMillan. And you already know the rest. 9 counts under the Human Trafficking Act, trafficking of crack and trafficking of fentanyl. The drug trafficking charges were tied to like a pattern, they said. She would do a call and make money. She would give that money to me, and I would go take that money to a drug dealer like she asked, and I would bring the drugs back to her. And that was the trafficking of crack and fentanyl. My mind was actually blown. In jail, I was terrified that I'd ruined my life. Literally thought I ruined my life forever. But before jail, there was hours of interrogation. I just kept repeating to the female detective, I didn't do this. I'm a mother of 3 little girls. I never forced anyone to do anything. I'm a victim of exploitation myself. I'm sick. I'm an addict. I'm a sex worker. I'm not a fucking human trafficker. But the system doesn't care how sick you were when you committed what the law defines as an offense. After 4 long months in the Sudbury jail, I was finally granted a bail hearing. I stood before a judge while the Crown attorney compared me to violent pimps in southern Ontario. Men who were released on bail then turned around and hurt their victim. And I didn't understand that because I had never been physically violent to anybody in my life. Not crazy. I've gotten in a scrap or two, but nothing like crazy, you know? It wasn't going to hurt no one. And when it was my turn to speak, I was determined to advocate for myself. I had a clear mind, but a terrified heart. But I was able to articulate myself in a way that actually convinced the judge that I should be eligible for bail until trial. And in March of 2020, I went home. Now, I'm not going to lie and tell you that I got clean right away because I didn't. I'm not going to lie and say the charges made me change my behavior because they didn't. I got out on bail and I relapsed instantly. It was literally like I had convinced myself my life was already over. So I started acting even more reckless than I was prior to getting arrested, if that's even possible. One night, shortly after I got out, my landlord comes out of her apartment. It's March, right? So it's freezing. It's the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and she stumbles upon me in a snowbank, blue, not breathing, in a nightgown. And for whatever reason, the creator didn't take me that night. I was in dire need of Narcan. When my landlord found me, right at that moment, my friend pulled in to the parking lot. I guess I had called him earlier. He drove an hour to my house and just happened to drive in right at the perfect time. He administered numerous doses of Narcan and called 911 and actually saved my life. But unfortunately, that was still not the wake-up call that I needed. Because after I got out of the hospital, I just kept going. It was literally like I had a death wish. What I'm going to tell you next is another turning point in my story. So I end up robbing a drug dealer and I got caught. And he kicked me down a flight of stairs and he bear maced me. in the face. And I remember running down the busiest street in Sudbury, LaSalle Boulevard, at like 7:30 in the morning with no shoes. It was like the end of March, first week of April, and I was bear maced in the face, screaming my head off because I was bear maced in the face. Now picture this, okay? So I'm currently on bail for 9 counts of human trafficking. I'm not even supposed to be out of my house. And the cops show up. I remember them banging on the door, begging me to let them in. They kept saying, Mel, we're not going to arrest you. We're not going to breach you. We know what happened. We just want to help. I took their word because I was in loads of pain, and I let them in. They called EMS, who dispatched 2 female paramedics who came in and bathed me for hours until I wasn't screaming anymore. I remember hearing one of the cops, one of the officers, on the phone with my mom. And she said, when she wakes up, if you don't make her go back to your house and keep her there, she is going back to jail until trial. So when people ask me, what was it that saved you? Like it was one thing, like it was just a moment, like I saw a quote, or it was a promise that I made to the universe, or a rock bottom that finally did its job. They want a clean answer. They want something inspiring. They want something inspiring, or they want a blueprint so they can give it to their addict loved one. But I can't even give them that because I didn't change after one rock bottom. I hit every single one over and over and over. I lost everything that makes a person a human being. My kids, my family, my dignity, my name, my self-respect. There was nothing left to lose but my pulse. So when people ask, how did I get better? I got to tell them the whole story. I got accused of something and I got charged. I got out of jail. I was found in a snowbank, blue and not breathing, in desperate need of Narcan, and I got bear maced for robbing a drug dealer. And when I woke up from being bear maced, like I said, it was the first week of April 2021. I knew right then, if I don't go home now, I'm not going home ever. Next stop, prison or a grave. So I went home. I went home to my mom and dad's house where my kids were. And yeah, it was a selfish choice. I wasn't trying to be noble. I wasn't trying to be a success story. I couldn't envision recovery or anything like that. I was just trying to stay alive. But selfishness doesn't always stay small. Sometimes it grows roots. So after that, I heard about this new medication, and it had a lot of success. It was kind of like Suboxone, but in a monthly injection. It was called Sublocade. And listen, I literally tried everything to help me get better. Methadone, Suboxone, Subutex, topiramate, everything. Even shock treatment. Nothing worked. But that shot didn't just quiet the cravings. It gave my brain space to breathe. It was like my mind started remembering who it used to be before addiction hollowed it out. I caught glimpses of her again. The Melissa who loved writing, the Melissa who loved acting, the Melissa who loved politics and thinking and speaking, the Melissa who had a voice. And that's when I found TikTok. And I know how that sounds. I can hear the eye rolls already, but I'm going to say it anyways because I don't care. TikTok literally saved my life. Because when I got out, I didn't have a village. Okay, I had wreckage. I had burned bridges, old resentments, people who felt like me not smoking crack anymore was something worth clapping for. And I get it. I do. But online, there were strangers, total fucking strangers that listened. And I told the truth for the first time. I told the truth, the ugly truth, the unredeemable truth. And people said, "You give me hope. You sound like my daughter. I lost my kids too. Your story makes me believe that mine isn't over." And suddenly my survival mattered to more than just me. My pain actually started having purpose. My story started carrying weight. My voice started having reach. And my entire world changed. Almost a year passed. We're in January of 2022. And the Crown comes to me with a deal. They drop everything except 2 charges. My lawyer said I could fight it. She said they didn't really have a case, that her version of events, the victim's version of events, and those that are documented are very different. My lawyer said that she had found out that at times when this girl said she was being forced to do sex work in my apartment, she was actually found sleeping in her own bed by EMS. A wellness check was called on her by a worker, and she was found asleep, safe and sound in her own apartment, not chained, not being forced to turn tricks for me. And there was also video evidence, footage of her and I taking the bus places together, walking around together, laughing, talking as friends. Nothing about our interactions seemed forced or that she was being held against her will. After my lawyer told me about the plea offer, I went home to talk to my parents. Because the Crown attorney had originally been asking 5 years in the penitentiary, my parents instantly told me to jump on it. But they also wanted to make sure that my name wouldn't be reported in the media, which my lawyer could not guarantee. But in the end, I chose to take the deal. Not because I was guilty or so I thought at the time, but because I wasn't willing to risk the life I was just beginning to envision. For the first time in almost 20 years, I could imagine a future, and I wasn't going to gamble that for anything. So when people ask what happened to finally make me change my life, I always say this: it wasn't just one thing. It was like the stars aligned and I got better, because that's exactly what it felt like happened. I didn't get better after almost 2 decades because I was special. And it wasn't because I deserved it more than anyone else, but it was because I stayed long enough and I survived long enough to let change actually find me. After taking the Crown's offer to plead guilty in exchange for most of the charges being dropped, I was still terrified. Is that charge going to brand me forever? I was about to become a convicted human trafficker. I'd be pleading to 1 count of material benefit in trafficking persons and uttering death threats. The thought of it was absolutely horrific. My fear about that label was not me being dramatic either. It was not paranoia. It was real. Because when you carry a charge like that, it doesn't stay in the courtroom. Okay? It follows you into every single room you try to rebuild your life in. I remember thinking, what is this actually going to mean for my future? Will I ever be allowed to be more than the worst thing attached to my name? And the truth is, even after almost 5 years of recovery, even after all the healing, after all the accountability, after winning awards, after everything I've done to try to give back to my community, there are still people who only see that charge, who will only ever see that charge. Just last month, now remember, this is the future. This actually happened a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. Just last month, someone who doesn't know my story, doesn't know my work, doesn't know the lives that I've helped stabilize, went online for 5 days straight saying I shouldn't be allowed to work with survivors. 5 days of videos being made about me, 5 days of people doxing my address, encouraging people to confront me, 5 days of being called a human trafficker. 5 days of telling people I don't deserve to be in the life that I worked so hard for. 5 days of reducing me to a headline. And not because of who I am today, and not because I was even caught doing anything unethical, but because of who I was when I was sick, when I was addicted, when I was living in literal survival mode. In November 2025, I was honored with the Jamie West Good Neighbor Award for my work in the community. And in January of 2026, someone was calling me Jeffrey Epstein all over Facebook. And that's the part people don't understand about criminalization and recovery. The sentence doesn't always end when you've done your time. It follows you forever. You can do the work. You can change your life. You can do the best to help save others. You can become the person you were meant to be and still be labeled by your worst chapter. Today, I'm a mom. Okay, I'm a single mom. Today, I'm a peer support mentor and a survivor of human trafficking myself. I am someone who lived through exploitation. So, yeah, having to stand in a courtroom and admit guilt to trafficking felt unbearable. It felt like my identity was being stolen from me. But here's what I know now: being labeled forever does not stop me from doing good. It does not erase the almost 5 years of recovery. It doesn't cancel out my lived experience. And it does not get to decide who the fuck I'm allowed to help. My fear back then was valid because the label did follow me. But what I didn't know then, that I know now, is that my purpose is going to follow me louder. So after I pled guilty to material benefit, I was sentenced in a way that still allowed me to rebuild my life from the ashes. A year's house arrest and probation. Compared to the 5 years in the pen that they were asking, it felt like freedom. Once the sentence was handed down, an article came out in the Sudbury Star titled "Trafficking Survivor Traffics Woman into Sex Trade to Feed Their Drug Habit." To protect the victim, the article didn't name me as the perpetrator, but everyone knew who it was about. After reading the reporter's version of events, my parents were extremely disturbed. My father especially couldn't believe that's what my life was like in active addiction, and I hate that he found out the way he did. Reading about my darkest chapter in the Sudbury Star. So people ask me sometimes, did you get her, as in my victim's, permission to tell this story? And that's a hard question to answer because I always want to lead with compassion and not ego and not justification. So here's the truth. What she says happened and what I remember happening are not the same narrative. You've probably heard of that saying, There's three sides to every story: her side, his side, and the truth is somewhere in between. So here's what I know today with a recovered brain and an honest heart. She was vulnerable. She was struggling with addiction, and I benefited from that, just like so many people benefited from my vulnerabilities. Whether she thought she was choosing it or not, whether I told myself she was willing or not, I used her survival as consent. And that's not the same as empowered consent. That's exploitation. And I own that. And that's why I literally do the work that I do today. And I don't share this story at all to paint myself as a victim. I share it because this is what trafficking and exploitation look like. It's not a movie scene. There's no chains, no kidnappings, but addiction and power imbalance, desperation, and blurred lines. I don't have any ill will towards her. None. Actually, absolutely none. In fact, her doing what she did is one of the reasons I'm even alive today. If I hadn't been charged, if I hadn't been forced to stop what I was doing, living my life the way I was, I would have just kept going until I died. I would not be the mother that I am today. I would not be almost 5 years in recovery, and I would not be standing here on this stage. So while we hold, different truths about the past, I carry gratitude in my heart, not anger. But here is where I stand firmly. I will never tell this story and call her truth a lie. But I will also not be silenced from telling my own truth, because silence protects systems. Silence keeps women in the exact situation we say we want to prevent. And if my past, messy, complicated, and as imperfect as it is, can help someone recognize exploitation sooner, leave sooner, or see themselves with more clarity, then telling the story is not harm. It's literally my responsibility. So once I started serving my sentence of house arrest in January of 2022, there were people placed into my life who took a chance on me. I had an amazing conditional sentence supervisor, a probation officer, who listened to the whole story and who saw me as also a victim and not just a perpetrator. She gave me a letter stating that I could be in the community as long as I was with my kids. I would be able to bring them to school every day. I would still be able to take them to extracurricular activities. I used the chance she gave me like my life depended on it, because it did. By her taking the chance that I wouldn't reoffend, she gave me the space I needed to start rebuilding my life. And in January of 2025, my probation and all of it was done. For the first time in almost 15 years, I was no longer carrying the legal weight of my active addiction. For the last few years, I've made it my mission to educate people on what trafficking actually is in our communities. It's not always strangers. It's not always kidnapping. It's not always chains. Sometimes it's a boyfriend making a girlfriend do calls for drugs. Sometimes it's drug debts worked off through trading sex. Sometimes it's a dealer making ads for you, knowing all the sex work you perform would be lining his pockets because he sold you his drugs, your drugs of choice. He was your drug dealer. So what we've been taught to believe about human trafficking literally just comes from Netflix and Oscar-nominated storylines, movies like Taken or Sound of Freedom. Strangers with foreign accents, shadowy men taking photos of women in Walmart parking lots. That story feels safer, doesn't it? Because it makes trafficking something over there. something rare, something that happens to other people's daughters. But I spent 18 years in active addiction, 18 years in the streets, 18 years of watching it happen in real time. And I've never, not once, seen a woman be kidnapped off the street and forced into trafficking the way the movies sell it. What I have seen, boyfriends traffic their girlfriends. I've seen drug dealers groom their clients until survival sex feels like a favor instead of exploitation. That's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Human trafficking doesn't start with kidnapping. It starts with need, with addiction, with poverty, with trauma. It starts when substance use disorder takes your humanity and your boundaries and your maternal instinct and your sense of self. It starts with women who are sick, women who are desperate, women who are already invisible. Our daughters, not someone else's. Our daughters. Us. If we actually want to stop human trafficking, we have to stop chasing the Hollywood fantasies and start looking at vulnerable demographics. Women battling substance use disorder, women that were raised in the foster care system, women coming out of incarceration, women living under systemic barriers that box them into survival mode. Because that's where traffickers are born. I could walk down Kathleen Street in Sudbury right now and see women being trafficked. I could point it out. I don't need to go to Walmart parking lots. I don't need to look for a scary white van. It's happening right in front of us. But we don't see it because we're too busy watching the theatrics, too busy waiting for the dramatic rescues instead of preventing the harm in the first place. If we keep believing trafficking looks like the movies, we will stay blind to the real thing. So let's be real. Let's drop the savior complex. Let's stop pretending this is rare and exotic and far away. Human trafficking lives in addiction, in coercion, in dependency, in relationships that blur the line between survival and consent. Until we focus on the women most at risk, the sick, the marginalized, the forgotten, we will keep missing it while it's happening right in front of our fucking faces. And now I want to speak to anyone still out there suffering the way I did. The one counting time in hits. The one who hasn't slept safely in so long that danger feels normal and peace feels fake. The one who says, just one more date, just one more night, just one more thing I'd swear I'd never do. I know you, okay? I was you. I know what it feels like to lose your humanity so slowly you don't even notice that it's leaving. To trade pieces of yourself until survival feels like consent and consent feels like a joke. Let me kill that lie right now. See, all of what you're going through happened to me too. I crossed lines I swear I never would. I did things I thought made me unredeemable. Walked paths I believe there was no coming back from. I didn't care about prison. I didn't care about dying. I didn't care if I disappeared. Because when addiction takes everything from you, fear goes with it. But hear me now, please. It will catch up to you. Not because you're bad, not because you're evil, not because you deserve it, but because survival has consequences. And I need you to know this part too. No matter what you've done or who you've hurt, you can come back from what your life is like right now. I promise you that. I am living proof that you can thrive after being exploited and criminalized. Today, I'm almost 5 years in recovery. 5 years. I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm not barely hanging on. I'm living every day and I'm thriving. I didn't just find recovery, I built a life out of the rubble. Today, I win awards for the work I do, not for pretending, not for being digestible, but for telling the truth, as ugly as it is. Today, I'm asked to speak in front of people like all of you here, sharing my story and sharing my truth. Today, I work with survivors, women who look and sound just like you, women who know what it's like to lose everything. Today, I'm a recovery coach. I sit across from women who think they're beyond saving, and I prove them wrong just by continuing to stand myself. Today, I have a podcast and I host support groups. I hold space and I speak life into people who feel like they barely have a life left. I became the woman I needed when I was sleeping with one eye open and my soul shut down. Listen to me. This didn't happen because I was special. It happened because I got tired of dying. I didn't edit my past. I didn't rewrite it either. I used it. Every charge, every mistake, every night, I thought I wouldn't survive. I turned pain into purpose. I turned survival into proof. I used to think that there was no point of even getting better because I'd never get my kids back, but guess what? I did. My 3 little girls are home with me now, and that alone is a miracle. That's what my family calls me today, a miracle. And I don't pretend it's promised to everyone. But recovery will still give you a beautiful life, even if it doesn't look like the life you lost. So if you're still out there, if you're still breaking laws, still trading your body for relief, still thinking you've gone too far, look at me. I'm not an exception. I am an outcome. I am what happens when a woman refuses to disappear. And if I can come back from everything you're living right now, you don't get to tell yourself you can't. So stay. Breathe. Choose life. Because I'm standing here telling you that it's possible. And that is the truth they never want you to believe. Chi McWitch, thank you so much for letting me share my truth with you today.